Good evening, everyone. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're watching The Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive into the stories, the big stories of the day. We continue to keep our focus on the arrest of 22-year-old climate change activist Disha Ravi in connection with what's come to be known as the Greta Thunberg Toolkit. The police commissioner of the capital has issued a strongly worded statement today in which he has said that the law cannot differentiate between a 22-year-old and a 50-year-old. The law must be the same for everybody. So Disha's age, the police commissioner argues, is absolutely irrelevant. Her age has drawn a lot of attention, especially from those who have jumped to her defense and said a young woman like her did not need to be in custodial interrogation. The police commissioner has also said that it's absolutely false that there have been any lapses whatsoever in Disha Ravi's arrest. If you've been living under a rock, let's bring you up to speed with what's been happening. If we bring up the images of Disha Ravi, well, till a couple of days ago, at least I had no idea who she is. And then I discovered that she is, well, I'm going to say it again, a young 20-something climate change activist based out of Bangalore. We do not know much about her except that one of her colleagues was on this program yesterday and did concede to a small, what he called a small mistake of not enough homework, including a link to a group based out of Canada called the Poetic Justice Group, which has since been linked to pro-Khalistan groups, especially its leader, M.O. Dhaliwal. Yuvan Aves, Disha's friend, on this program yesterday said that link was included along with dozens of other links. And yes, more research should have been done about what this group was about, but went on to argue that they had no direct conversation with this pro-Khalistan group at all. The other two accused in the case are also activists, Nikita and Shantanu. They have appealed for anticipatory bail, and the police say they did have one Zoom call with this Poetic Justice Group. On the program today, our focus is somewhat different. After this arrest, how do we understand two things? One, what happens to India's young activists? What are their politics? What are they thinking today? And two, what happened to the farmers' protest? How did that become a forgotten headline? Let me introduce our panel on the program today. We've got a full house, and let me introduce them one by one. We're joined on the program by Vivan Marva. Vivan has spent a considerable amount of time studying the political choices of India's young and their various other attitudes, in particular India's millennials. So I think he knows a little bit about what we're talking about today. Gurmeher Kaur has also emerged as one of our most outspoken and prominent youth voices. She is, of course, a scholar from Oxford, an author, and many other things besides. So welcome to the program. Anurag Saxena is joining us, columnist, commentator based out of Singapore. Welcome, as always. Pleasure to have you back. Nikhil Taneja actually spends his life, he's the co-founder of Yuva. The very name suggests that he spends his life working with India's young. So I think we really do have people today who, more than me at 49, has a sense of what India's young are thinking. Welcome also back to Sandeep Ghosh, a trenchant columnist and commentator. Always love to have him because he has very unpredictable positions, cannot be slotted. Those are the best kind of people. And we have here with us Avik Saha, the national convener of the Jai Kisan Andolan, because like we said, in the midst of Disha, Greta, Nikita, Shantanu, names we did not know till 4 days ago, fallen off the headlines, are of course the farmers' protests. And to that extent, while the government is getting a lot of flack from certain quarters for some of these arrests, there could be also some political advantage in the way that we are seeing this actually play out in the end. Now, let me start by asking you, Gurmeher, because I did see your tweet and I did see your comments, and you said you stood strongly with Disha, right? But I do want to ask you, not many may know, you're the daughter of a soldier, of a martyred soldier. So you have an army background, right? You're also from Punjab. Now, this allegation of the fact that not Disha directly, but certainly the other two, Nikita and Shantanu, were talking, maybe inadvertently, to a group that has pro-Khalistan links, as a young woman, as a daughter of a soldier, as an Indian. Does that bother you? How do you understand that?
I mean, of course, my identity, it remains what it remains. I'm an army kid. I'm very much Indian, but from my experiences as an activist, what I've understood of how organizing works, or how groups on the internet are made, and how social media works, it's often that, like Disha's friend just mentioned, that there might have been a lapse of research not well done into the groups that one is a part of, and that often happens, and that could happen to almost anybody, I would not hold this one Zoom call with a group called the Poetic Justice that doesn't come up front as a pro-Khalistani group, but as a group that talks about justice and human rights. I wouldn't hold that against the activists, because as organizing goes, it's protests are always intersectional, and like I said, I think it's a situation. I would assume it's a situation of research not well done.
Yeah, when Gurmeet, you say that the Khalistan links don't emerge at all, but like we had to do a kind of cursory Google search, and by the way, I annoyed a lot of my liberal friends by focusing on one dimension. You see, when a movement is diffused, all kinds of people do arrive to fish in troubled waters. So, by my own experience on the ground at farmers' protests, I would say, 99% of the people I met, staunch patriots holding the tricolor. But there is a 1% who made their way in. There is a Deep Sidhu who made his way in. That Deep Sidhu was exposed on this program. So it does happen, right? And we've seen
my request to everybody.
Sorry, let me just bring up his pictures now. Those are pictures, of course, of the farmers' protest. But if we can bring up also the pictures of Dhaliwal, M.O. Dhaliwal, the man at the center of the storm, Gurmeet. You said that it's not immediately apparent. And, Disha's friend on the program yesterday was saying, yes, they could have done a little better homework.
Yeah. I think, I wouldn't pay so much attention to the 1%, to the 1% of the 100% that makes the farmers' protest. I think the more we focus on the Khalistani elements, the more we talk about whether it's seditious or not, the more we talk about young people and linking them to the Khalistani movement. What we're doing is we're sort of taking away from the larger farmers' protest and from the conversation. And I think that's exactly what's happening. And it's almost it's a pattern, right? The moment there's a big people's movement, whether it's a CAA, whether it was the Ramjas protest, there's often what the government, what the state machinery, what media ends up doing is they would pick soft targets. At one point, it was me. With the CAA, we've seen multiple arrests of student activists, and the conversation has always ended up being separatist, anti-national, sedition. Like these are the tag words that keep coming up over and over again. That take up so much more space. Whereas the real topic and the real intent of every person involved is to be a part of the farmers' movement. And I think it's very important to keep that conversation focused there.
Right. Okay, the farmers' protest, of course, has fallen off the headlines, and to that extent, could it be that the government, the administrators have made a calculated risk? That's something certainly to explore. But I want to bring in Vivan at this point. And Vivan, I know you've spent some time studying political attitudes of the youth. Now, when you first started actually preparing your book, you did find an overwhelming support actually for the Prime Minister, for the BJP dispensation among India's young. But we've seen two, I would say, youth-led movements. One was citizenship legislation, and the other is you've seen a number of young people involved in this particular farmers' protest. How do you think this arrest is playing out among young people, Vivan?
So absolutely right, Barkha. In 2014 and 2019, the biggest chunks of the Prime Minister's coalition have been young people. And so he got 34% of the youth vote share as per CSGS Lokniti data in 2014, and it was about the same or a little bit higher in 2019. In my own interviews, when I met and spoke to young people in the run-up to the elections, it was almost like, why are you even asking this question? Because obviously we're going to be voting for Modi. And so that was a prevailing sentiment that I found across at least many of the Hindi-speaking states in India where I was doing my research. Now, of course, as you did mention, the CAA and some of these farmer protests, they have a lot of young people involved, but I would not say that the critical mass of young Indians today are behind these movements. I would still say they stand behind the BJP and the Prime Minister. And just to contextualize this, we have to understand that Indian youth, more than anyone else in the country, are the intended audience for a massive information, or what some might call misinformation campaign, that's being waged for their votes, that's being waged for their support. And they're being very aggressively courted by the BJP and its allies. And of course, they've been courted with success. And as such, the social media campaigns, the tweets we see from celebrities, the hashtags, we see all of these issues framed around themes such as nationalism and national pride and sovereignty, which are, the very appealing sort of flags for young people to rally around. And so, in an ecosystem where media cannot necessarily be trusted all the time, it's
Yeah.
very tempting, and it's very, alluring for young people to sort of rally behind the prime minister and India's sovereignty, which is set to be at stake by the ruling party.
So,
And
are
so I
you
would
saying,
say,
Vivan? So, are you saying, Vivan, by framing it within a nationalist narrative, the kind of pushback that young people would have felt about one of their own, because people do relate to, the police commissioner may say it doesn't matter whether she's 22 or 50, but I think 20-somethings would care that she's 22. But you're saying by framing it very aggressively within the larger nationalist narrative, the BJP, in your opinion, is being able to contain that pushback from the young.
absolutely. Like, I personally believe that, again, we should be talking about the 99% and not the 1%. And the sort of Khalistani links is a red herring. I don't know Disha Ravi myself, and I've never spoken to her, but I think her driving issue is climate, and it's not actually Khalistan. Most young people don't know much about Khalistan. But we hear all about Khalistan and we hear all about Modh Haliwal because that's an easy issue to frame the debate around. It's much easier to frame it around something like Khalistan than it is about climate or about farmers. Now, on a different note, I don't actually understand the link between climate and farmers because the two are actually sometimes in opposition to each other. But the reason we hear so much about Khalistan is because it's being framed around nationalism, and that's what young people can be rallied around as opposed to her age. And at the end of the day, I mean, the Delhi Police Commissioner does have a point. The law applies to everyone regardless of their age. If you commit a crime when you're 19 or older than that, you're still an adult and you should be tried as an adult. That's a separate legal issue.
I think the point, and we had the Delhi's former police commissioner on this program, who basically said that maybe you needed to question Disha and her colleagues. Maybe you definitely need to question Nikita and Shantanu, who actually had that call with the group out of Canada. Disha did not have any direct conversation, but do you need young people in custodial interrogation when they are no security risk? But I want to come back, Nikhil, to you, to Vivan's appraisal that the moment you have nationalism as a competing force against activism, and we have seen this political strategy, if you will, from the BJP repeatedly, from JNU through Jamia, through the aftermath of terror attacks, to anyone who asked questions about the Balakot strike, to now what's happening with Greta Thunberg. See, you could ask intelligent questions about, and I know many economists who said, should Greta Thunberg be putting her weight behind farmers who do water intensive crops, wheat and paddy, and that actually militates against climate change, and that could have been an intelligent, complex conversation. But on the other hand, we now see this as being a battle of who's a patriot and who's not a patriot. And Vivan believes that in the end, India is young. No one wants to be called an anti-national, right? We all think we're patriots. And so this becomes an almost impossible allegation to counter.
Absolutely, Barkha. I think, first of all, thank you for having me on this show. I agree with what Vivan was saying to a large extent. In fact, Yuva had also done an exit poll along with Indian Express in 2019, just before the elections. And we found exactly what Vivan said. We did find that a lot of young people are supporting Modi. And at the same time, they don't characterize themselves as, communal in any way. So they don't associate anything which is communal, anything which is toxic to the image of our prime minister, which is that one understanding that they have. They might even say that we are apolitical, and yet we do support PM Modi. And that was very interesting for me to understand. And what is happening over here at a larger level, I suppose what we need to understand is we are right now in the youngest country in the world in many ways. We are 65% of our population is under 35, 50% of that is under 25. That's 1/3 of our country. Because of the pandemic, there is perhaps the largest youth workforce in the world that is now facing unemployment at a very large extent. When you have this much time on your hands and you don't have enough things to do, and there are not enough opportunities being created actively by your government. In fact, when you think of Atmanirbharta, the idea of that, I feel, is also in many ways to kind of tell the youth that there may not be enough opportunities created by the state or created by private companies. So maybe you need to figure out what you want to do. The problem is where you have Atmanirbharta as one narrative being said. On the other hand, there is also a narrative of anybody who is perhaps Atmanirbhar in the thoughts that they have, perhaps anti-national, right? Because
Yeah.
and that's the worrying thing. You have a comedian who is saying, who has not even said something in a show in MP that he was arrested for. That boy has come out and put such a beautiful video where he's saying, let's favor love over hate. And then ultimately I feel it also comes down to just about empathy, right?
Yeah.
Are we empathetic enough towards our youth? Are we giving them enough opportunities to have lives and have growth in our country and be responsible, incredible citizens of our country, and work on things that make our country better, versus giving them narratives that they're constantly outraging about on the internet. And what was really disheartening, and this is the last point I'll make, what is really disheartening for me to see is that no matter what is, I mean, again, there are obviously too many complexities in this case, and no matter what our opinions may be on this, there is so many memes online which showcase Disha Ravi as pregnant, which showcase as her in really vulgar clothes and vulgar positions. It's so sad to see this is the way that we are going about talking about young people in our country and young women in particular.
Yeah, I think that the way women are targeted for having an opinion is something, I think, it used to bother me if you had the same conversation with me, let's say 10 years ago, even I would have responded differently. Today, I'm sitting here with a thick skin, even as there's a video calling for my hanging. So that is where we've reached. But why should we have to reach there? Why should we have to live life as if it's some sort of boot camp test on Twitter? But Nikhil, do you want to just weigh in on the larger impact this may have on young people's activism? Now, the thing is, one doesn't have to agree, and here is where I will emphasize youth. One doesn't have to agree with positions that young people take all the time. But as someone who's been 21 and 22, and there were many positions I took at that time, I'll share one. When I was in St. Stephen's College, our seniors marched against the Mandal Commission implementation. Today, I have a very complex view of caste and affirmative action. I have no idea, but I was so delighted by the idea of marching on the streets for something. It was just like magic, right? Now, if we're not going to allow people to find that space, make their mistakes, even if we say this, a mistake has been made here.
No, absolutely. I feel, again, as I said, it comes down to empathy, right? It's not so much the fact that this is a young person. Let's even assume that she has done something wrong. And for what it's worth, what we have seen so far, there doesn't seem to be anything in particular that she has done wrong, apart from the fact that she was part of a global activism movement, which is being led by an activist herself, Greta Thunberg, who has been feted by literally every international organization worth its salt. And she's been part of that movement. She's been working towards an issue which is the most important issue of our lifetimes, climate change. And within that context, if she has even done something wrong, let's assume for a fact, for a bit she has done something wrong, is this the way we should be targeting her?
I agree. And I saw Anurag today soliciting opinions online. I'm wondering whether you got any intelligent answer. What is the advantage to arresting this woman? Criticize her, disagree with her. Let me put that to Anurag, because I saw your tweet and you said, hey, feedback welcome. What was the reason? And I'm telling you that even people who don't support the farmers movement, who think Greta Thunberg is flaky, who think like you do that this is Western savior complex, that these global icons have no business getting involved. How have you improved your global narrative? How have you improved the image of yourself as a thriving, robust democracy if a teen climate change activist and a 20-something climate change activist, irrespective of whether you agree or disagree with their politics, it gets this reaction, Anurag? How does this make the government look good? I don't know. How does it make the government look good?
Well, I think, so Barkha, there are three specific issues here, and this is something I myself was a little torn on. First, I think we really need to start differentiating between activists and protesters. Holding up a placard is not activism. Holding a candle is not activism. For me, a climate change activist is somebody that actually goes out there and reforests or plant trees or teaches kids how to have a little potted plant at home or whatever it is, right? So I think we're doing a huge disservice to real activists. You see, activist is about action. Without action, without activity, there is no activism. Now, I would like to differentiate that, there's a huge difference, and we're doing a disservice to activists by calling mere protesters activists. So that's, again, unpopular opinion, but somebody's got to talk about it. Second, the whole issue of coming up with excuses of, oh, she had a single mother, she's a woman, she's young. I don't think purely from a perspective of law or morality, we should be using that as a defense for somebody. We all saw in the Nirbhaya episode, and it shook all our souls what a young person was really capable of. Not just committing a heinous act.
Can I just jump in briefly there? I take the point that young 20-somethings are soldiers. I remember covering Kargil, where the average age of every soldier I met was 24. I take the point that terrorists are teenagers sometimes. Kasab was, 19 when he came in? I take the point that Burhan Wani was young. I take all that. But I would take it, Anurag, if the crime or the alleged crime or the alleged violation of law was commensurate, right? What is the worst that the Delhi police has said about this girl? I'm sorry, I'm calling her a girl. I should call her a young woman. About this young woman. That
absolutely.
In a docket that she edited, she put one link which turned out to be a guy who has pro-Khalistan leanings, but she also included 40 other links. She doesn't know this guy. It's like me getting a photograph taken with someone at the farmers' protest. Tomorrow he turns out to be Khalistani. How am I accountable for him?
Well, you see, so Barkha, one is there's almost a bit of normalization and condensation that is happening when we refer to this lady as a young girl of her teens, etc., etc. She is a major. She understands what the act means. She has, if the reports are right, she has actually tweeted that, hey, listen, sorry?
What is the act? That's what I'm saying. If you look at the worst thing she's accused of, what is the worst thing that she's accused of, Anurag? The worst thing is editing an online docket where they included a link of a group they should have done more homework on. That is the worst thing that can be said about Disha Ravi as far as I know.
So two things here, Barkha. One is that Section 15 and Section 18 of the Act are absolutely clear that if you are doubted as having links or abetting a potential terrorist organization, which is what they're calling the Poetic Justice Foundation, if you engage in activity that either causes harm, which is Section 15A1, or harm to human beings or public property, that is strong enough grounds. And we saw what happened in the protests. A symbol of the nation was pulled down. Cops were beaten up, etc., etc. And here's the saddest thing: this whole farmers' protest, it was meant to be something that the poorest of the poor actually needed. It got taken over by a few politicians and a few international, call them foundations, agenda setters, whatever it. Look at who we have speaking here, right? There is no pure farmer as part of this particular conversation itself. And I think that's the unfortunate fact.
This conversation is not about that, but you make a fair point. And let me take that to Avik, who has been working with the farmers' protest. And Avik, do you where it stands today, the farmers' protest is the forgotten story. The headlines are dominated by Rihanna, Greta Thunberg, Meena Harris, Disha Ravi, Nikita, Shantanu Muluk. And frankly, it could be said that the Western intervention, while raising the profile of the world's media, actually probably gave the government an exit route that it didn't have when these guys hadn't butted in. Avik?
Yeah, Barkha, this entire conversation is actually just about the farmers' movement. Yeah. The government has taken a call that they will draw it to the long haul. They will challenge the will of the farmers. And right from the beginning, much before this entire toolkit business happened, they've been trying to denigrate, destabilize, delegitimize, and destroy the farmers' movement. I heard Khalistan on the third day the movement started. So this is a narrative that the government has been working on and is building on. On toolkits, if you follow social media, it's almost now being used as a bomb. Oh, she made a toolkit. I make toolkits all the time. I ask followers to tag all kinds of influencers, social media, important people. I say, please tag Pradhan Mantri Modi, tag Amit Shah. So the whole business is to stop the farmers' movement, to discredit the farmers' movement, to say that we told you that this is supported by Khalistanis, and to slowly break it down. The farmers' movement is going through a difficult phase, Barkha, and it is very difficult. It's almost 90 days now, and lakhs of people sitting for 90 days is not a joke. So the government is actually trying to hammer the movement back, and unfortunately, Disha has become a tool in their hands. And I really feel bad that this young woman, who Anurag says is capable of taking decisions, all she did was actually support the farmers, and the government is trying to take away the non-farmer support base to the farmers' movement. This is the strategy, this is the trick, this is what is happening. And shame on the Delhi Police Commissioner. He's the man who's he's conspiratorially responsible for the movement. Because I wrote to him saying that give the farmers a protest site, give them boat club. And he's the man who stuck to his ground and said, no, there is COVID, when Bihar elections were taking place. So they created this situation. They are now trying to find people who they can punish as an example. And this prosecution is the punishment, Barkha, be no doubt. They don't have to be found guilty. They will not be found guilty. But this entire prosecution is to send a message of fear. Now, if fear is going to be the tool that the government wants to use against the farmers and those who support the farmers, I, for one, believe that it will not work. And no amount of civilized discussion on television is going to change that, because this is something farmers will fight for.
You raise a fair question that the bogey of Khalistan was there from the first day, but do you believe that the farmers' movement made similar mistakes, which, by the way, are mistakes that creep into any diffused movement that doesn't have one leader, where that you can't actually vet who all is coming, because people are coming from different directions. For example, I've asked you this before, a week, whether Deep Sidhu should have been weeded out much earlier and much more firmly, pretty much after his interview with me.
When you're building up the movement, you're seeking support. If someone supports, you take that support at face value. If what Deep Sidhu did on 26th January was actually damage the farmers' movement. And we said, no, this guy is bad for us. He mustn't.
I'm saying you could have done it before. I'm saying it was probably a mistake to not probably, I would say it was a mistake to not have done it before. So and this is where age comes in, Anurag, if perfectly seasoned people can make these mistakes, I think young 20-somethings can make the mistakes. Anurag, briefly, and then Sandeep. Go ahead. Anurag, go ahead.
10 seconds, just responding to Avik. 10 seconds here, Barkha, just responding quickly to Avik. You see, I understand the cognitive dissonance and the need to externalize the blame of the protests failing to the government. It's the most natural thing to do when you set out on an endeavor. When it does, you find somebody to pin the blame on and around it. But let's all be very, very clear. The farmers' protest was not killed by the government. I don't care if they were trying or not. It was Ichhadari politicians who decided to use it for their own benefits to prop up the independence of fights. Let's not. We're all grown up, mature adults here.
Okay, let me just bring in Sandeep now, who's been waiting patiently. Sandeep, your comment online said that the arrest of this was not a good arrest of young Disha Ravi was not a good public relations moment for the government, and I would agree. Even sort of media organizations known to be quite soft on the government, the editorials are all unanimous. This arrest was wrong. By all means, question this young woman if you need to, but custodial interrogation, no one's going to believe that she's some hardened terrorist, who needed custodial interrogation. Sandeep, let's bring you in.
So I would kind of turn the police commissioner's statement on its head and say, yes, age does not matter, because if at my grand old age, if I'm tomorrow taken into custody for appearing on Barkha Dutt's show, without.
I mean, I think I'll be arrested before you will, so that's fine.
No,
But
so
go ahead,
I'm saying,
yeah.
so therefore, to that extent, age is, it should be age agnostic. I agree. And therefore, I also would not harp too much on the age factor of Disha. Second point I would make is when you're talking about deflecting attention from the farmers' agitation, and here I would hold my friend Abhik and his peers quite squarely responsible. If they have allowed the agenda to be hijacked, you can't blame the government on it. Or if the government is, I'm being very amoral about this thing, say that they're on two sides and government is playing a tactical game. In the tactical game, they might try to deflect attention. But then if you are so committed to the farmers' movement, why are you allowing the agenda to be hijacked?
That's for a week to answer, and I asked him the same. You have not answered what I asked you. How is this a good moment? You see, I'm sorry, but I cannot escape this. I'll tell you why I keep emphasizing the age. I emphasize the age because I juxtapose the age with the alleged violation. If the alleged violation was grave, and Avik is right, we have made this toolkit sound like it's a box of AK-47s. It's a goddamn online docket with hashtags, handles, and some links, as far as I know. Right? So therefore, we have to stop making it sound like it's a box of explosives planted under the Red Fort. It's not.
So that's
but yes, the corollary, and let me preempt it, is that there are people who said Trump's tweets incited violence. So the question you have to ask is, did Disha Ravi say anything that incited violence? I can't see that. Maybe you can talk about poetic justice and the other two people who I don't know much about and what conversations they had. But this girl, what did she do? She put an online link in. Do we, for example, Sandeep, just a question, small, last sentence. Do we do a background check on everybody we retweet? I don't.
No, none of us do. I totally agree with you. And a lot of people tag you on a tweet and you don't really know what's the agenda, etc. Yeah. You may do that. So as far as Disha Ravi is concerned, I take what Neeraj Kumar said yesterday on your program, that the police must have a very compelling logic and overwhelming logic to prove it. Otherwise, they have more than egg on their face. Otherwise it's very, very, I would say, stupid PR to go after a 22-year-old and knowing fully well that everybody will be, coming down heavily upon them to do that. So if they have taken a gamble consciously or otherwise, and if they're defending it, they better have a very solid case coming there. Because this entire thing, what I've been also maintaining from the beginning, to my mind, I see there is definitely more to it than meets the eye in the farmers' protest. Now, if that is so, I just take half a second, and therefore that requires a different form of intelligence gathering, different kind of action than going after one straw with somebody in Bangalore.
I just told Mr. Neeraj Kumar that if indeed there are Canadian separatists fishing in troubled waters, British diaspora separatists fishing in troubled waters, Pakistanis fishing in troubled waters, go after them. Not a movement in Bangalore, the average age of volunteers in which is 8 to 18. It's primarily a school children movement, whatever you may think of it. Now, let me just go around the panel. Sorry, Sandeep, I'll come back to you. I think,
half a second. I heard Neeraj Kumar's response to you about Dawood Ibrahim being out of reach. But if Dawood Ibrahim be out of reach, doesn't mean, Disha Ravi is in reach, so we go after Disha Ravi.
That's the point. That is the point.
We have to get other people,
That is the point. Exactly. That is exactly the point. Go ahead. You wanted to come in.
Yeah. First, I'd like to respond to something that Mr. Anurag said in the beginning, which I found deeply insidious, which is calling people protesters and not activists, and saying to be an activist is to act. How do you define act, sir? To speak up, it's an act. To organize is an act. To show up at a protest is an act. And if you actually do go to a protest site and where you meet protesters, you'll notice that everyone is organizing, being a part of a movement in their own smaller spaces, even within a larger protest, and they're all activists. Second, and this narrative of an activist versus a protester, this whole an Andolan Jeevi that shows up everywhere, that's been very popular, it's deeply harmful. And what it's doing is you're So who exactly is an activist then? The people who show up at universities and start hitting people? Because I've often seen them being labeled as activists, and no one calls them a terrorist who are attacking their own citizens. No one calls them as violent goons, which is what that act which is called activism is. And secondly, this whole conversation about young people, it's very important to talk about age, because like Nikhil said, we are a country that's very young. The majority of our population is under the age of 25. And what this whole action is, this whole messaging that goes by arresting Disha Ravi is that any young person that speaks up in a way that's not in accordance with the government and its policies will be then charged with the highest action, will then have to face the highest action by the state. And the result of it is that you're discouraging your younger citizens from exercising their basic democratic rights, like speaking up, protesting.
So I will let Anurag come in on that later. Let me just get Vivan and Nikhil and Avik in, and then Anurag can respond to all of you. That point that the Prime Minister made, of course, taking a swipe, as it were, at protesters in Parliament. Vivan, how do you think that would go down among young people who are, of course, kind of wedded to the idea of rebellion and protest? I mean, that's the whole thing about being young, right?
And to add to that, I would say young Indians have a lot of reasons to be out there protesting. Before the pandemic, youth unemployment in India was at a 45-year high. Young people in India do not have formal jobs. Maybe less than 2 in 10 do. The cost of living is increasing, opportunities are decreasing. So there's a lot of economic hardship and distress out there. People have many reasons to peacefully protest. And attacking them as being Andolan Jeevis or parasites is frankly attacking democracy, because protest is one of those facets of democracy. But I just have a question that I ask to many of my friends who support the government and who sort of lean towards that side, is that if your intention is law and order, and if you have a problem against a toolkit, then why are you not calling for the arrest of people like Komal Sharma and the man who fired a gun at protesters during the Jamia protests? He was inducted into the BJP's Ghaziabad unit, and then finally they got rid of him. But these people are walking around, scot-free right now. If your goal is law and order, why are these people who have actually broken windows and shot guns, why are you not calling for their arrest? So if you believe in the law, let's apply it uniformly. Or let's just say we believe in applying arbitrary standards of the law on arbitrary methods against people we don't like for editing Google Docs, because that's what really this is about.
All right, let me bring in Avik, who wanted to make a point, and then Nikhil. Avik, go ahead.
There is no point in using bad words against each other in such a civilized debate. Let's just get to the core of it. You may have one opinion, I may have a different opinion. But the point is that the farmers are struggling for their life and livelihood. They are seeking support. They want support of the whole country. And the Prime Minister does not want others to support the farmers and wants to break the movement down piece by piece. Now, one of the important segments that supported this movement are youth. And they, as Vivian correctly pointed out, they are also a segment in turmoil. So this is tactically trying to separate two segments in turmoil by punishing, giving exemplary punishment to a person. So anybody who belongs to that strata of society will think twice. Their parents will say, don't go out, this can happen to you. These are very dangerous people. And I say this for the nth time, that calling names like Ichhadhari and all of that sounds excellent. That's great wordsmithy. But every politician is supposed to be protesting about actions of the government that they feel are wrong. So when Mr. Modi was not in power, he was an Ichhadhari. He was there in every protest. His party had to be there in every protest. The moment you get power, how is it that everything that is democratic becomes your enemy? That's a very important question to ask.
Okay, let me just get Nikhil, and then Anurag, you can come in on that. Nikhil, you work with young people. What are you sensing today about this arrest? And of course, there is no monolith. There is no one kind of young person. There's no one kind of Indian. But when you posit, are you a patriot or are you a protester? That is a binary that I reject. You can be a patriotic protester, right? You can also be a non-patriotic protester. Similarly, you can be a television anchor who thinks he's a nationalist, but actually use Pulwama for eyeballs. So you can be many things. But in this noise, people get scared. It takes an extraordinarily thick skin, a tough hide, and extreme confidence. And young people may or may not have that, because that's where youth becomes important. You either have that fire or you're young and vulnerable, you're still finding yourself.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Barkha. In fact, I'm going to add on the points that both Gurmehr and Vivan were making, and say that this idea that young people cannot raise their voice, or they should not be raising their voice because that is called a protest, and that's not activism. I feel like is very very determinedly false for this generation, because this is a generation that has grown up with access to the internet. They've grown up with awareness. They've grown up with understanding of what the world can be beyond the world that we tell them is the way the world works. Our country, and I think patriarchy in our country has very well told almost every gender of child has been born, that this is your story. This is the way you have to follow your life. This is the things that you can do. These are the things you cannot do. This is the way you speak. Badon ki izzat karo, etc., etc. Everything has been given to them literally as a toolkit when they're born, right? But this is a generation that is not rebelling, just for the sake of rebellion. This is a generation that rebels with a cause. This is a generation that very well understands what it is rebelling for. Disha Ravi is not just somebody who's outraging on every internet trend. She has dedicated her life to the cause of climate because she believes, and very rightly so, that it is a cause worth living for.
But then by that logic, Nikhil, we'd have to say her age is irrelevant. She should have been fully cognizant that when they included that link to this poetic justice, they did slip up. Her colleague did say that they slipped up, that it wasn't perfect homework. They should have researched better.
I agree to that. In fact, I feel like, we should absolutely, there is a little bit of accountability that almost everybody who's calling themselves an activist should have. Maybe there was a lapse in accountability over there. And that was probably also in the heat of the moment. There was a moment now to bring the protests, in a global light. And as Gurmehr also earlier said, protests are intersectional. Every young person recognizes that. They recognize that, if you're protesting for climate change, you cannot, when somebody else is protesting for marginalized rights, you cannot say, no, your protest is not important, mine is. Because every protest moves the ball further. It makes your voice heard. It makes you realize that this is an important, that youth voices matter.
But it's risky, right? It's the way citizenship legislation issues were brought into the farmers' protest briefly, till the farmers actually said, take these issues out. Right. So it's risky because in diffuse movements, in diffuse civil society movements, and of course, I must underline the fact that one of the reasons that people are having to do this in this country is that this is effectively a country without a national opposition. And therefore, the onus that is being put on people to figure these things out, it becomes much more disproportionate than it may be in other contexts. Nikhil, you just want to complete that sentence, and I want to go to Anurag.
I'm with you in that, and as you said, Barkha, none of this is binary, right? I think you are absolutely right in that. There is a risk over there, but is that risk worth the payoff that you might get when your voice is heard? When what you're protesting for, what you're trying for is probably comes true, and you get more rights, you get more opportunities, you get the opportunity to make your country better. And again, let's not talk about government. This is nothing to do with the government. It is about taking your country forward. It is about making sure the people of your country are having good lives. That's what it is about. And if there is a risk, I feel like every young person is taking that risk today, and it is okay for them to take this risk. Should there be more accountability? Absolutely. Should the state understand that while they're taking this risk, they are young, and perhaps a little bit of empathy towards that? Can we channelize their passions to kind of make our country better, or should we scare them, and any word that they use should be used against them, is the question that I think we should be talking about a little bit.
That's a reasonable question, Anurag. That's what I'd want you and Sandeep to respond to. Like, maybe there was a mistake. Does that mistake merit this young woman being 5 days in custodial interrogation like she's a terrorist? And what are we saying to other young people who want to discover themselves and their politics at this stage of life? And their politics may well change 10 years later, 20 years later, 15 years later, or it may not. We don't know. Yesterday's Trotskyites are today's BJP walas.
Yeah, absolutely. All of us have weird bohemian values growing up, and then reality hits you, and that's a part of human evolution. But let me quickly respond to Nikhil's point first, because I don't know if it was intentional or not, but he very seriously misquoted me, so I have to clear that. I did not say that youth should not be allowed to protest. I was one of those guys, Barkha, that you talked about, who stood on top of a bus and protested during the Mandal Commission issue back in the early 90s. I do that even today. All I was saying, and I still hold that, is look, there's a reason that there are two different words in the English language: activism and protests. If they meant the same thing, there would be just one word for it.
What do you
So
mean?
perhaps there is some introspection.
Gurmeher asked you, how do you define that difference? And I think you should take that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Action or activity has certain set objectives, timelines, milestones. You define a needle that moves from point A to point B, right? You make some kind of a positive movement on some measurable objective that you have in place. Calling somebody else wrong all the time, it is legitimate. I'm not saying that you should not do it. There is no judgment here, right? You have all the democratic right in a country to say, hey, you're wrong, I'm against it, here how it is affecting me, my citizens, and what have you. However, it is not activism in the way activism, in the literal sense. I'm not saying there's no space for protest. I'm not saying that it should not be allowed. I'm just saying that, look, unless you have an objective, unless you have a needle movement, unless you have some positive outcomes that you can attribute to yourself or to a movement, it is not activism, it is protest, which is a legitimate right to have. But let's not conflate these two. I mean, there's a reason the English came up with two different words for it.
Okay, but
quickly going back on the Disha Ravi situation.
Yeah.
Sorry, quickly on the Disha situation. Look, I totally agree with you and some of the earlier panelists. There is perhaps way more than meets the eye, because of which she's been taken in for interrogation. I don't think Delhi police or any police would be would subject themselves to egg on their face to make a frivolous arrest like this. Especially we've seen people with much worse behavioral record not being acted upon. Right? So I do believe there's something more than meets the eye. The only thing, the only cognitive dissonance again that I want to talk about in Disha Ravi's case or any other activist case, when the gender card displayed is, look, you cannot be feminine when you want to and feminine when you want to. You've got to choose.
It's not that.
I am a strong
It is not that.
feminist on
It's the language. The language she's deconstructed in is women specific. Like if there are memes of her showing her pregnant, morality of women is questioned, sexuality is questioned, weight is questioned, looks are questioned. I have seen horrible. I have seen horrible memes saying she doesn't even look 22. Oh, I look younger than her. Utter crap, which is only reserved for women. This has nothing to do. There is a gendering of the critique around her. There is a gendering of the critique around her.
Barkha, Shehla Rashid. Okay, so Barkha, Shehla Rashid on Twitter called me a wrinkled old uncle, right? It is the format where in 1 billion people, you will have a % of the population that likes to troll, likes to abuse, etc., etc. Right wingers get abused, left wingers get abused. Women, men, old, young, everyone gets abused, everyone gets trolled. I mean, there's fancy stuff on Twitter and YouTube. My daughter learns Hindi cuss words looking on.
And I'm saying all of it is wrong. It's rubbish.
Absolutely.
We cannot be okay talking like this to each other, about each other. But let's not pretend that women are spoken about in the same language as men. They're not. We are not. Not they. We are not. We are not spoken about in the same language as men.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree. But that doesn't give somebody the right to play the woman's card when law is applied to them. Play the card that, hey, this is an unjust arrest. Play the card that, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. Don't play the card that, single mother, young woman, blah, blah, blah. I don't think legally it's not a valid defense. Morally, let
me bring Sandeep into that conversation. Sandeep. And sorry, Nikhil. Sorry, one line from Nikhil and then Sandeep. Yeah, Nikhil, one line. quick interjection.
I'll just make a very quick point. I'm sorry, I think I mischaracterized what Mr. Saxena was saying, but I do still feel that protest is not linear. A protest can turn into activism. The first protest you go to as a young person can give you a cause to fight for the rest of your life. So if you're saying that somebody cannot protest, that is not fair, because I feel like that is really where you learn the fact that you're allowed to.
I am not saying you cannot protest.
But you're saying there's a difference, and you're saying that there's a difference between, what activism is,
and this is
and
where
what
I would say, and by the way, this is where I would say, yeah, age does matter, because when we are young, we embrace issues that sometimes we don't fully understand, and we see through them. We pick the ones we stay with in life. We reject some others. Our politics changes. My feminism has changed radically from when I was 22. But can we move on? Sorry, because we'll keep getting stuck into this very semantic conversation on who's a protester, who's an activist. We need to return to Disha Ravi, what's happening to young people, what's happening to the farmers' protests. Sandeep, go ahead.
First thing, I have a minor point of difference with Nikhil. And he mentions that, Disha Ravi has been steadfastly on the climate change issue. If she has been steadfastly on the climate change issue, why does she get on to this farmer bandwagon? We have all discussed the contradictions in that, but obviously she is not sticking to one agenda or one cause, so to speak. So there is more to that, and I don't think we should be just papering over it or glossing over the whole situation to say that no, she's allowed to protest on whatever she wants at that point. Then you'll obviously get into the issue of the rent-a-cause protester. Which hopefully she is not. And that's where Anurag's point and my point also would be between a protester and an activist. An activist doesn't really have the luxury of moving from one activism to another activism. They stay with the whole issue. So let's not get into that, because as far as the arrest is concerned, all of us have said, I think very few people can really justify the fact that she has been arrested and taken into custody. Another point where, Abhik, I don't entirely agree is about what is the impact this is going to have on the youth. In fact, if the cause is strong, this can actually trigger much more action from the youth. If people believe that this is a great action, it could. And if parents want to contain it, Abhik, you and I have seen in our own growing up stage during the Naxal movement in Calcutta, when there were a lot of people whose parents just put them on the next flight, send them to Canada and USA, and they've a whole course of life changed because that's how they wanted to prevent them. But there were hordes of young people, despite being targeted, despite being attacked, some killed, they were getting into the whole issue. So if they're really committed to this cause...
Could go either way. I actually agree with you. This could go either way. We don't know, and it will depend on how much information the police is able to place in the public domain that is convincing to people. Not just convincing to the court, but convincing to people at large. I need to start taking last closing comments, 20 seconds each. I'll start with you, Vivan.
So, just my closing comments, Disha Ravi, Amulya, Leona, Munawar Farooqi, these are people we'll spend a news cycle talking about, and then we'll forget about some of the main issues facing young people in India, which is just a lot of economic hardship and lack of opportunity. And I think all of this, of course, it's extremely important. We need to raise our voices against unjust arrests and the rule of law being applied selectively. But young people have extraordinary challenges today. And in many ways, by arresting young people and targeting like this, we're just setting up the stage to stop those future agitations down the line when they do come up. And so a lot of what my work and my research focuses on is what do young people in India aspire for, and are they able to get there? What are their aspirations and what are their anxieties? And ultimately, what really drives young people today is, financial and economic stability. And we're not really seeing that in most...
And those are not the conversations happening. Sandeep, last 20 seconds.
For me, another point is, I think when we are talking, Nikhil again said that, people protesting are trying to improve their country betterment. Betterment is anybody's point of view. Disha Ravi may think something, somebody else may have a different point of view about what's betterment. So we must recognize both. And I think taking the cue from what everybody has said earlier, today we are also creating a divide within the youth. The youth which supports Narendra Modi, they are coming from a different kind of So there also you're getting an elitist and a non-elitist mode, and that could be far more dangerous. So you are having one section of the Shaila Rasi and Disha Ravi and people who are getting branded or seen as people who are joining the anti-government protest, and therefore it's maybe polarizing much more of the other youth towards. I don't want to get into.
And I think all of this polarization is actually just terrible because it is anti-intellectual. It prevents us from having complex conversations. Avik, last word. Avik, you're on mute.
The Delhi police, as of now, are about misinformation, tarnishing India's image, and inciting unrest. If Disha, whatever be her age, was alone or in collaboration with a few people capable of doing all this, then we are living in a very, very fragile India. And that's what should worry us. Are we living in that kind of an India where our ego and our country might break because someone makes a toolkit or tweets something? It's a question that we need to address to ourselves.
Yeah. Good, Mayor?
I think my final point, I just want to just building on what everyone has said, I do want to point out that there's a certain pattern of intimidating young voices that has happened, and that's exactly what's happening with Disha Ravi. We've seen this in JNU, we've seen this after CAA, we are seeing it right now. And what we need to, the bigger the question, we have discussed the whole issue with Disha Ravi, but what we really do need to be very worried about is this consistent pattern of intimidation that we're normalizing, and that's not okay. And I think that's the biggest fear for young people, because it sets a precedent. Governments come and go. Today, it's more. Today, you have more progressive, left-leaning students who are being targeted this way. The same laws that are being used tomorrow could be used against students on the other side.
Shreya Singhal, who is the lawyer who took on the Congress on the 69A law, made precisely that point, that she felt that the BJP was playing from the Congress playbook, and these were people who'd gone to jail in the emergency protesting against exactly these kind of crackdowns, and they were now playing by the Congress playbook. So that was, I thought, an interesting point. Anurag, quickly, and then Nikhil can take the last word. Yeah, Anurag.
Well, look. As a second generation learner, my grandfather was a farmer, didn't know how to read and write. My father picked up a pen and a paper, and look where we turned out. As a second generation farmer or a second generation learner, somebody who still goes back to the village often, etc., I feel deeply offended that farmers' rights have been trampled over by people with specific agendas. Those specific agendas could be political in nature. When we talk about domestic agendas, there could be perhaps far more insidious in nature when we talk about international agendas. If the Delhi police is trying to investigate, find linkages, figure out what's really going on, because look, I think we're beyond the point of debating that the farmers' agenda has been lost somewhere for a Khalistani agenda, anti-India agenda, anti-Modi agenda, anti-Congress. I don't care. But at least, let's agree that the farmers' protests is not a farmers' protest anymore. As a citizen, I expect my government to find out who took over these protests, which were actually very necessary to maintain farmers' rights. And I think that investigation needs to take its own course.
You could argue that it has elements who are not farmers, like Deep Sidhu, but you can't say it's not a farmers' protest. I've been there multiple times.
Look at the... Yeah, but look, Barkha, I saw your show where you went and shared bread with a couple of women who were who were there for the last couple of months. So I know you've been there on the ground, dragging your sketchers out and posting pictures about them and all of that. So I know you're doing it. But look at the larger narrative. Look at the larger narrative about the farmers' protests. I mean, Rihanna and Greta Thunberg and Mo and so. If there was some kind of a metric you could assign to it.
Yeah. I'll allow Avik a line there, just a line. I'll allow Avik just a line there to respond to what you've said.
This is classic Modism, speaking in broad, sweeping statements. It's very much a farmers' movement. Which Khalistani is sitting outside in Singhu and Tikri? Go and check up. Get your facts right. That's all I have to say.
Okay. This is going to carry.
Well, so
yeah, Anurag, one sentence and then Nikhil. I really do have to close. Sorry.
That's the whole point, right? This conversation is evidence of the fact, this conversation could have been about the farmers. But because of what Disha Ravi and a Poetic Justice Foundation and whoever did, this conversation is not about the farmer. Let's at least stop being in denial about the fact. Let's stop being in denial about the fact that the original cause has been lost somewhere. I live in Singapore. You pick up the New York Times, you pick up the Washington Post, you pick up any international publication. It is about a whole bunch of other things. It has domestically become about something else.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's only the poor farmers which will end up paying at the end.
And I think the question that must be asked is, how did that happen? Why did it happen? It could be a bunch of reasons, some which are linked to the some which are linked to the government. Nikhil, last word on youth and activism and politics. Got to close, sorry.
I think it's important for us to recognize that this is one of the youngest countries in the world. We have, the largest youth workforce in the world. How do we channelize the passions that these young people have for the causes that they care about, for the country that they live in, and turn them into something beautiful, instead of trying to give them more opportunity to outrage, more opportunity to have conversations which are not going to help them grow or not going to help the country grow? How do we change the anger and outrage into conversation? How do we change into community building? And as I said before, for a country which is talking about Nirvarta, we should be allowing young people to have Atmanirbhar thoughts, because that's the kind of young person that is going to make our country better.
And the only way that can happen is without name calling if you have a disagreement, which is unfortunately the time. Yeah, the name calling is just hideous.
And without fear and intimidation of young people. That is one of the very, very important things we will have to try and do as a country now.
Absolutely. We'll have to leave it there. I think there can be no disagreement with what Nikhil just said. So we do end on a note of consensus. Gurmeher, Anurag, Avik, Sandeep, Nikhil and Vivan, thank you so much. We'll continue to keep a close eye on this story. To our audience as ever, thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. See you then and goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.